Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 154 of What If Naruto Was in Rosario Vampire. If you guys enjoyed this what if and want to see part 16 of it, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel. Before we start, please do support for more awesome content. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. Naruto thought his eyes were betraying him. They were standing in an infinitely larger crater of sand than before, but that's not what caught his eyes. There, standing tall and proud, was Madara's Susanoo. It looked like it was barely holding itself together, but it was slowly healing. Its ribs came back, the head started to reform, and the arms soon followed. Madara himself stood inside of the blue being, unharmed. His purple rippled eyes stared at Naruto with a cold indifference, goading him, taunting him. That clearly wasn't enough. How the fuck is he still standing? He stared at Madara for a few moments in astonishment, but was brought back into reality when he saw that one of the Susanoo's arms had formed a sword and held it above its head. He readied himself, preparing for the blow that would come his way. Armor started to reform on the ethereal being, but the sword was swung before it was completed. "We need to move, Naruto." Kurama's voice broke through to him, and he did as instructed, moving the chakras surrounding him out of the way as quickly as he could. Even with how fast he could the sword still only just missed him. Sliding, he watched as the sword slammed into the ground, cracking it, and creating a giant trench that was probably thousands and thousands of meters long, cleaving straight down the middle of all the sand dunes in the way. Definitely didn't want to be hit by that, Naruto muttered. Naruto grumbled to himself. He was in the market district of Fujimi City, a bag already in his hands, despite having not been there for long. He blamed the pink-haired vampire walking next to him. Sure, he had a nice amount of money from the casino, but even then he still felt like Mocha was going to run him completely dry. The air was crisp, the sun was beaming, the people in the market were bustling. People haggled, vendors, children walked alongside their parents, some looking miserable that they had to be there, and others looking overjoyed at whatever they held, whether it be an ice cream, a balloon, or some sort of small toy. Mocha gave a small smile at the scene. Everyone looked so happy. Naruto glanced at a boy who was trudging behind his mother, a pout on his face, before he jerked his thumb towards him. "He doesn't look so happy," the blonde said blandly. She didn't falter. But he could be. She fastened her pace towards a vendor that sold children's toys. Her green eyes flicked over them until they landed on a wooden horse and lit up. "I'll take it," Mocha said enthusiastically, quickly handing the money over and more before all but skipping towards the boy. Naruto groaned and followed. "I hope this isn't going to be a recurring thing." Mocha tapped the little boy on the shoulder, making him stop and turn around to look at her. His dark eyes showed his curiosity. The vampire smiled and bent down to his level, offering the toy to him. "Here," she said. "This is for you." His expression lit up with a smile, and he took the horse from her. "Really?" Mocha nodded. "Thanks, miss," he said loudly, excited, before running up to his mother who had stopped and had been watching the event. Mocha stood back up and Naruto lightly tugged on her arm. "Come on," he said. "There's still other stuff we need to get." It was long past lunchtime when they'd finished their shopping, and they hadn't eaten anything yet, so they decided to order some food at a noodle stand and sit down. It didn't take long for their food to arrive. A steaming bowl was placed in front of each of them, before the man that had served them walked away, wiping the sweat away from his forehead. Naruto dug in immediately. "Swallowing," he said. "Not bad." He took another mouthful. "Definitely not the best, but still alright." Mocha took smaller mouthfuls, and scolded the blonde in between. "Don't talk with your mouth full." Naruto inhaled some more. "And don't eat so fast, Naruto-kun. You'll choke." "I won't choke," he protested, jabbing the two sticks in her direction. "You've got no faith in how well I can eat ramen, Mocha-chan." Nevertheless, he listened and slowed down his pace. Out of the corner of his eye he noticed two men talking to the store owner, the same guy who'd served them their food. They wore the same dark blue uniforms he'd seen the other two guys wearing back when he'd first arrived in Tokyo, as well as the hats, and holstered on their hips, were what looked like the same guns those two men had been aiming at him. He idly wondered if it was the same two people, but dashed the thought when he got a glimpse of their faces. Maybe they were in the same organization or something similar. Naruto finished his ramen and leaned back on his chair, giving out a sigh. "I miss Ichiraku's." He shook his head. He wouldn't go back to thinking about how the ones who had been closest to him were dead. He promised he wouldn't look back. That he'd always move forward, no matter what. Mocha finished up not long after him and stood up. "Ready to go back. The others will be wondering where we are by now." "Yeah." Naruto brought some of his money out and tucked it under the barrel he'd used. "Let's get going." As they started to move away to Naruto's side, he saw one of the men in the dark blue uniforms look their way. His dark eyes widened when he saw Naruto, and he pulled the gun from its holster, aiming it at the blonde while calling out at him. "Stop right there." A lot of the other humans screamed at the sight of the object and ducked under and behind things, tables, chairs, anything they could. Naruto stared at the man, a bad feeling forming in his gut. Do you want something? The other uniformed man pulled out his own gun and aimed it at him as well. Just stare right where you are. The first one said calmly but firmly as he made his way towards him. Don't make a single move. The other uniformed man spoke into something that was attached to his shirt, maybe a radio, but his attention didn't stray from Naruto. Naruto didn't like the situation one bit. His instincts were telling him to make a break for it. Why? What's going on? Stay still. The dark-eyed man snapped when Milka shifted on her spot. With his left hand, he brought out a pair of metal cuffs from the pouch hanging off of the belt around his waist. Naruto ground his teeth. He wanted to get away from this, and now he could feel the negative intentions in the man rising. Fuck it, he thought. He let the man get close. When he grabbed his wrist, Naruto reacted. The blonde spun, his arm going around the man's neck to hold him as he dragged Milka behind himself in a swift move. Naruto held tight, making sure the man's body was covering him and Milka from the other man aiming the gun at them, and grabbed at the man's flailing arms to keep them from hitting him. Naruto was going to speak up, make a threat to snap the guy's neck he was holding, but there was a loud bang and a choking gasp, along with the screams of the civilians who started to scatter. The man gargled in Naruto's grasp. Shy. Another shot went off. It ripped through the air and Naruto felt it go through his chest, and out his back. He looked down and saw the man he was holding. There was a gaping hole exactly where his left eye had been, blood pouring out of it, and there was another hole in his chest spurting blood. Naruto could feel the blood rising in his mouth, but he held it down, dropped the corpse and grabbed Milka. His body lit up in a golden glow for a split second. There was a giant boom, and they were a few blocks away from the market district. He set Milka down on her feet and spat out the blood, wiping his mouth from any excess. The bullet hadn't hit anything vital, it had gone clean through, and the wound had already started to heal. He was honestly surprised and glad that it hadn't hit Milka. Milka began to fuss over him. Naruto-kun. She looked him over with worried green eyes, checking for any other wounds. He grabbed her shoulders. I'm fine, he insisted. He could sense them, their chakra, as minuscule and non-existent as it was, as well as their negative emotions. He couldn't tell exactly how many there were, but he estimated around 20 or so. And they were close. But we need to go. There's more coming. I don't want to cause any more scenes with humans. But you're hurt. She frowned, softly placing her hand over his pretty much healed wound. You were shot in the chest, Naruto. You need to take it easy. No, I'm fine, he reinstated. Trust me. There he is. Naruto's head whipped around at the voice. Men in black gear had came out of the alley just up ahead, kneeling down with larger but not overly so guns aimed at him and Milka. He counted 10 of them, and the others were coming up from the other end of the street. Naruto clucked his tongue. Damn it. The civilians in the street had begun to panic, running away from the area as fast as they could. Stay right where you are, or we will shoot. Naruto didn't listen to the man he yelled at. He wrapped his arms around Milka, and the men started firing. But Naruto had already moved, surrounded in Kurama's chakra as he crouched on the side of a building on the opposite side of the street. He quickly glanced down back at the street and saw something that made him feel a quick stab of guilt. There was a few civilians who hadn't managed to get away, and now lay dead on both the road and the sidewalk. He didn't have time to dwell on it. Up there. As soon as the man had shouted it out, Naruto and Milka were both gone, but the bullets still flew. Sukune leaped out of his chair when there was a massive boom just outside of the hotel room, leaving a ringing in his ears. He looked over towards the sliding door that led to the balcony just in time to see it open, revealing Naruto and Milka. They looked relatively okay, save for the blood rolling down Naruto's shirt and the mix of emotions on the vampire's face, none of them being good. What happened? He asked. Naruto's face went flat. We went shopping. Sukune blinked. Then these assholes showed up. People died. And we got out of there. Without the shopping. Sukune swallowed the bitter taste in his mouth at the mention of people dying. It seemed like no matter where Naruto went, people were always dying. How many? At least 4. The blonde only seemed a little bothered by it. He shook his head and changed the subject. So how's Ruby-san? It took Sukune a few seconds before he answered. She's fine. Just been asleep most of the day. Her attitude is still the same when she's awake though. I'm going to go check on her. Milka declared, somewhat stiffly walking past, and into the room, where Ruby was more than likely still sleeping. Sukune turned back to Naruto with a sigh. Come on, he said, making his way to the lounge room where a chair and couch were waiting for them. Tell me what happened. It's not like there's anything better to do anyway. Naruto shrugged and followed. He told Sukune everything that had happened, from seeing the 2 men, when they were having lunch, right up to the point when Naruto had ended up just outside of the hotel room. Really? He asked, blinking. You got here that fast. How? He knew Naruto was strong and could teleport, but he hadn't seen the blonde put any of his kunai anywhere yet. Chakra, Sukune. Naruto waved it off like it was nothing. You might be able to be like that one day, but only if you keep training. Sukune felt like the blonde was keeping something from him, but didn't push the matter. Okay, sure. But anyway, those men you described, they sound like the police. Naruto cocked an eyebrow. The what? Police? He repeated. They're law enforcers, they make sure that crimes don't happen. Or at least do their best to. He leaned forward, arms resting on his knees, head slightly dropped while staring at the carpeted floor. But they wouldn't have shot you, or even shot altogether. If anything, they would have used a taser. He shifted a bit. And those guys in the black suits. They sound like a higher up form of law enforcement. SWAT, or something like it. But they did shoot. Naruto pointed out. Straight through the chest. Killed one of their own. And those civilians in the street too. They died because of this law enforcement crap. The blonde leaned forward questionably. Does this happen often? I mean, the 2 police guys I met in Tokyo didn't look too friendly, but they didn't try to kill me or anyone else. Sukune shot a question back at him, curious. How'd you meet 2 officers in Tokyo? Not important, he said. Just answer my question, Sukune. No, it doesn't. Sukune leaned back into the couch. I don't think there's ever been a time when the police have ever openly shot in a crowded area, nor have I heard anything about them killing fleeing civilians, accident or not. They don't just make mistakes like that. Naruto held a contemplative look for a while, but sighed soon afterwards. Whatever. He grunted, flopping back to the chair. We're going to have to be careful though. The police, or whoever they were, are probably going to be looking for me. And they're willing to kill anyone to get to me. Closing his eyes, the blonde let out a small sigh. I'll have to stay up and keep a lookout tonight. I can do thaw. No? A blue eye cracked open. You can't sense chakra, Sukune. You're not going to be able to tell when they start their way here. He deflated. He wished he was capable of doing more and not be so useless. Fine. So? Kurama apparently decided to start up a conversation. Are we going to talk about today? The glass door that led over the balcony was closed, curtains drawn to cover it, same with all the other windows in the room. No one could see in. In the lounge room, hanging on the middle of the wall, was a flat-screen TV, playing the news. A shooting in Fujimi City. The lady, a cute blonde with the microphone, was saying. In the top right-hand corner of the screen, there was a small, square photo of his face. It wasn't the best quality, but you could still clearly tell it was him. 4 have been confirmed dead, including a Fujimi police officer, and 12 were left injured in the mass panic. But we've had reports that they're all able to leave the hospital early tomorrow. Naruto sighed. He leaned back against the wall next to the glass door. I don't want to, but we probably should. He paused momentarily. Plus, those men, the police. Sukune said they were law enforcers. But you don't believe that? Kurama pointed out. Not for the ones you saw today. No, I don't. He agreed. They were too aggressive. Killed one of their own, and the civilians. He glanced at the TV with the cute blonde still babbling on about the incident. And everyone's acting like something like this has never happened before, and never should have happened. Something caused it to. Or someone. That's what you really think. The Biju piped in. You think that someone is coming after you again. And they're willing to take out anything in their way, intentionally or not. Naruto slid down the wall until he was sitting up against it. If it was possible, he'd swear he could feel his own eyes start to dull. Yeah. It's the same shit all over again. Just in a new world. It was silent for a good minute or so. Then Kurama spoke again. It could be him, Naruto. He didn't respond. He could have made it here as well. And he wouldn't have given up just because of what happened if he did make it. I've had my suspicions, but... He shook his head and breathed deeply. No. It's not possible. I would have sensed him, and the Jubi when we arrived in Tokyo. I'm too familiar with that chakra to not sense it at all. He took a deep breath. Fairy tale. They're the ones after me. Somehow, they've gained control of human law enforcement and are using them to get to me. Kurama didn't say any more. It had felt like hours had passed, but in reality it was only 20 minutes. Naruto started to fidget. He was about to start walking around, but stopped when he heard light footsteps coming from where the bedrooms were. He looked over and saw the person he'd only seen a few times that day. Urbi. She wasn't wearing her full getup. Instead, she had just a black tank top on, as well as a long, light-colored skirt that reached her ankles. He could make out some material on her feet. Socks. It didn't really look like it, but it didn't really matter that much anyway, he supposed. She was holding her magical stick firmly in her hand. Hey, he said. Her reddish-pink eyes flickered straight to him, widening in surprise like she'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. She stood stock still, just staring at him. Hi. Naruto offered her a half-smile. And what are you doing up so late? I could ask you the same thing. She retorted, a little defensive. He rolled his eyes, stood up, and stretched a bit. You already know what happened today, he said. Seeing her nod slowly, he continued. Well, I've got to stay up so that if they do come, we'll be ready. Oh? She shuffled on her feet, inching towards where the door was. So? Naruto said. She stopped in her tracks, and he began to walk towards her. Are you going somewhere or something? That's none of your business. Ruby bit out. She was backing away towards the door now. Oh, I think it is. He picked up his pace, but was still considered walking. You've been our guest, and you tried to kill us as well. Ubi's back collided with the door. She bit her lip. Nervousness began to creep up on her face. Naruto was close to her now. He gently grabbed her arm and leaned down to whisper in her ear. You're free to go. He took a step back with a smirk, amusement running through him when Ruby began to blink at him rapidly with a dumbfounded look on her face. Wah, you can go. He gestured to the door. I'm not going to make you stay here. If you want to leave, then leave. His smirk fell. But if I see you trying to harm any one of us again, I'll make your crows feast on your corpse. She gulped and nodded, quickly sliding out of the room. As he felt her signature getting further and further away, he felt negative emotions begin rising in the distance. It wasn't much, and it was pretty far away, so he wasn't overly worried about it. He walked over to the window and drew the curtains back enough so he could look out. The city was lit up, but there wasn't many people around, not that he really expected there to be considering how late it was. A few cars drove up and down the roads. Naruto was about to close the blinds when there was a tink. A small hole suddenly appeared in the glass, and something softly hit the wall behind him. He felt something whiz by his head, screeching in his ear as it went by, and noticed another hole in the glass. Well, fuck. He moved out of the range of the window. He could feel more negative emotions rising, from multiple directions and a fair amount of people to boot. Time to leave, Naruto. Yeah, no shit. Naruto retorted. He made a dash for the rooms, knocking loudly on all the doors in order to wake everyone up. They came out one by one, wearing the clothes they'd worn to bed. Kurumu had a light blue fluffy nightgown, her eyes were dreary, and her hair was a mess. Yukari had yellow pajamas on, with black-brown pointy hats and wands decorated on them. In her hand was her own hat and wand, making Naruto idly wonder if she slept with them. Mocha rubbed her eyes and stifled a yawn with her hands. Her hair wasn't in a much better state than Kurumu's, and she wore a gray shirt that was way too big for her. What is it, Naruto-kun? We need to leave, he said in a rush, beginning to walk towards the door. Don't bother to grab anything. There's no time. And keep your heads down. His friends quickly rushed after him. Naruto. The blonde quickly glanced at Tsukune's shirt, boxers, simple, and grabbed his backpack on the way. What's happening? Naruto tore the door open. They found us. They found us. That was definitely Yukari, but he ignored her. He sent some chakra into his wrists. A tri-pronged kunai popped into his hand. He leaned into the corridor and flung it. He watched it sail through the air, and then he watched it impale itself into the neck of a police officer, who had rounded a corner, gun in hand, with so much force that it kept going until he was pinned to the wall. Come on. He ushered them all out before slamming the door and putting his palm on it. Markings quickly spread out, covering the door, before disappearing. Now their stuff was safe. He glanced at the others before he began running towards the corpse, the others following, as that's where the stairs were. They needed to go up. As they ran, Milka came up to his side. Naruto-kun, she said, making him look at her. The vampire gestured to her rosary. Take it off. I can help. They started up the stairwell. No, he said firmly. We're leaving, not fighting. Even as he said that, he could feel that the police were only a floor under them. Their room hadn't been up very high in the place to begin with. Milka didn't say anything else. As they went, Naruto occasionally threw one of his tri-pronged kunai into the wall, so he could teleport back to them at different floors. Finally, they reached the top. Naruto shouldered the door and burst it open. As soon as he could, he hurled one of his kunai as far as he could. He could feel that the police weren't far behind. Stay here. Two of his kunai came into his hand, and he dropped one immediately. The last thing he saw on the roof was Milka's frown. He reappeared on the wall in the stairwell, just a floor down, in a crouch. As it turned out, there was an officer right there. And he damn well used the man's surprise to his advantage. Naruto covered his mouth with his hand, and slit his throat in one swift move. There was another 3 men right behind him. Not stopping his movements, Naruto threw the kunai above their heads, and teleported to it just as they started firing. He wasn't really thinking about what he was doing, but he could feel the kunai as he twisted his body around, and used it to slice the first man's head down the middle, straight through the second's neck, decapitating him, before embedding it directly into the last officer's forehead held deep. He listened to the bodies collapsing against the concrete stairs. He sighed and straightened up. The other police officers were a couple floors down. He'd only dealt with the first few of them. Oh well, he mused. It's time to go anyway. Reappearing on the roof, he wasn't very surprised to see Milka giving him a disappointed look. You said you weren't going to fight. I wasn't planning to. He lied. But they were too close by the time we reached the top. My kunai wouldn't have had enough time to land before they got here. Speaking of, he held his arm out. Everyone grab on. Tsukune was first, grabbing on just under his elbow. What about our stuff? Kurumu and Yukari were next, taking up the rest of the space his arm provided. Don't worry about it. He held his hand out for Milka to take. I put up a seal. They wouldn't be getting in there no matter what they do. She looked him straight in the eyes. He could see the disappointment and the hurt in her eyes. He knew why too. She wanted to help him, but he wouldn't let her. Mocha lifted her arm up, grabbing a hold of his hand. And just like that, they were gone. Ruby landed on the ground softly, her black wings remaining. She hadn't had time to grab her shoes before she ditched the hotel room, so the only thing between her and the earth was the material of her tattered stockings. She didn't mind it though, she enjoyed nature and the feeling it gave her. She took a deep breath and looked at the figure who was in front of her, her master. She knew that her master wouldn't be happy. She'd stayed with humans whilst she'd recovered, after all. She took another breath in and gathered herself. I have returned, my master. Ruby. Her cold tone made Ruby flinch and harden her grip on her wand. You were defeated by mere humans, weren't you? Ruby didn't answer, knowing a rhetorical question when she heard one. Her master turned her head slightly, shifting the tan cloak she was wearing, and revealing some of her facial features. The same ones that destroyed my Hanabik, correct? Ruby shifted uncomfortably. Yes, master. She admitted. She was about to speak again, say that two in the group were actually Ayashi, but didn't get a chance to when a strong vine whipped across the ground dangerously close to her, leaving a mark where it had traveled, very clearly showing the power behind it. You were taken in by them. She spat, turning around fully to face Ruby. Her face was grotesque, even still, after all the times that Ruby had seen it, when that belonged on an Ayashi, rather than a witch. Her angered expression didn't help any. With the skin on her face bulging, it looked like plants were growing and moving in and around her entire head. Her teeth were sharp and grotty, a truly unsatisfying color. Her skin had tinged green, unlike her hair which was almost identical to the vine she controlled. You mingled with them. You were warmly taken care of by them. You enjoyed being with them. No, master, She wasn't having any of it. This is such a shame, Ruby. I thought that I'd thought you better. She said. It's almost as if you don't know how many witches have been killed by humans. Ruby took a step back as vines started to crawl through the grass towards her. They'll take you in. Treat you nicely. And the next thing you'll know, you'll be tied down, a fire under your feet. The humans you met today aren't any different. Master. Ruby tried to back away, but they were too quick. The vines latched onto her stocking-covered legs, traveling upwards, wrapping around the rest of her body and squeezing tightly, keeping her in place. They lifted her up off the ground, as if to put her on display. They squeezed tighter and she grunted. Her master lifted her arms, controlling the vines, more slithering up Ruby's body, and holding her tight. It seems like I'm going to have to re-educate you. Just as Ruby was about to let her master do what she wanted, she heard a familiar voice yell out. Or, you faggot in the stupid cloak. Mocha watched as Naruto stared daggers into the back of the figure's head, having just called whoever was wearing the cloak out. Once he had teleported them from the roof, he'd taken off on his own, and they were forced to follow after him. They bashed their way through branches, ignoring the small stinging cuts they received, their feet crunching against the ground as they ran. She didn't know how long they'd gone for, but it seemed like no time before Naruto had stopped after the mass of trees had come to a halt. She shivered as the cold night air hit her bare legs. She really should have put something else on. The vines stopped contracting around Ruby, and the figure slowly turned its head. Green and bulging. That was the only real way to describe the aged face that looked at them. The same trespassers. The old woman hissed. Naruto walked a few steps towards her and Ruby. The look on his face didn't change. Coupled with the blood splattered on his clothes, staining his hands, he looked more like a monster than any other she'd seen before. Put Ruby-san down, lady. She didn't. Instead, she turned and faced them fully, revealing the rest of her disfigured and mangy face. Why should I? She questioned. And why should I listen to a human while he's trespassing on my property, no less? Because if you don't. Naruto began, not breaking eye contact with the aged woman even for a second. The air around them started to feel heavier, but it was only a minor discomfort. Then we'll make you. We? Sukune asked, perplexed. Mocha couldn't blame him. She was in a similar state. Was Naruto going to actually let them do something, without making such a big fuss about it? He glanced at them. Yes, we. He emphasized. This is ours to deal with, not just mine. So we'll all deal with it, if you want to. He focused his eyes back on the old cloaked woman. I'm not babying you. I won't make your decisions for you. Mocha felt glad for his words. Out of seemingly nowhere, one of those plant monsters burst from the ground right underneath their feet, jaws wide open and ready to take Sukune's head off. The human's eyes were wide with shock, falling backwards from surprise, looking like he was trying to get out of the way. But Mocha could tell he wouldn't make it. That was, until the plant monster was stopped in its tracks, before being slammed into the ground. She heard a loud whirring sound, and a blue, spinning sphere was shoved into his back, grinding through it with ease, sending green blood spraying everywhere. This all happened before Mocha was able to regain her footing, and Sukune fell on his ass, staring at where the monster had been. Naruto stood up straight. He looked at her, blue eyes flickering to the rosary on her chest. Mocha took in a breath. She didn't have to fight, she knew that, but she wanted to. No more sitting around and doing nothing. Taking a step towards him, she smiled. "Let me help, Naruto-kun." He reached up, grasped the rosary, and tugged. The explosion of yoki that Mocha had created subsided. The moonlight illuminated her now silver hair, and her red-slitted eyes were all but glowing. The shirt she had on rode up her leg a little more, but not enough to reveal anything important. "Uzumaki," she said, pretty much ignoring everyone else. Naruto smiled easily. "Care to join in?" She glanced at the old woman with a judging look. "Why should I?" She brought her eyes back level with his. "She isn't going to be much of a problem." Naruto opened his mouth, but closed it when he saw those plant monsters rising from the ground around the old hag. There was about as much as he'd first dealt with, but the amounts kept growing and growing until all he could see was a sea of them, snapping their jaws, ready for a feed. He decided to finally answer. "Because you want to," he said. "You have as much of a thrill for a fight as I do. And there's the agreement we have too." She crossed her arms and closed her eyes. "Don't compare myself to you, Uzumaki." The plant monsters began to roar, and seconds later they bolted towards him. The ground rumbled from the sheer numbers. "It's degrading." Naruto rolled his eyes. Some kunai popped into his hands and he handed them to Tsukune. He saw that Yukari had her witch hat on, wand ready in hand, and that Kurumu's wings were out, and her nails had extended into a lethal weapon. "Try not to get eaten, yeah. It wouldn't be a very good story to tell people that you were devoured by plants." The first ones reached them, and Milka reacted first. Her leg reared up and shot forward, destroying the monster's head and sending its body hurtling backwards at breakneck speed, toppling over a nicely sized group of them. As Milka began her own rampage and the others ran forward after her, Naruto summoned a round of his tri-pronged kunai. Letting all but one of them fly through the air, he ran through some hand seals. The kunai started to multiply rapidly, going from a small handful to hundreds and hundreds of them within seconds. They came down from their arc, peppering the army of plant monsters, some killing them, but most either missing or maiming. He gripped the kunai tighter, before disappearing into the middle of the mass of hungry plants. He sliced, hacked, dismembered and decapitated, fluidly moving from one kunai to another. He was coated in blood, not moving all too far each time he reached another kunai. He noticed Tsukune, Kurumu and Yukari had come together, covering each other's backs. He also noticed that, around the whole hag who had her hand on some BOOK which made him presume she was a witch, it wouldn't be too far-fetched, and they did that whole kind of thing she was doing. A bunch of the plants were gathering together, sinking their teeth into each other, bodies melding into one. They devoured her, building taller and wider as they went. "No?" A voice that was definitely Ruby shouted out. "Master. You can't use that spell." Naruto impaled another monster. "That can't be good," he muttered. Around him, their jaws hungrily snapped at him, and he started to go through another set of hand seals, different this time. There was probably less than half of the monsters now than there was just a couple of minutes ago. "Okay, no more screwing around." He reared back before leaning forward, opening his mouth and blowing, releasing the jutsu. It cut up all the ones grouped in front of him, sending what bits of them that were left airborne, and slicing the ground as it went. Something smashed into the ground behind him, followed by a crunching noise. He turned to see Milka, 1 foot on top of a crushed plant monster close to his back, too close for his liking. Her arms, legs, and shirt had splotches of green blood on them, but she didn't seem bothered. Her red eyes focused on him for a moment. "You're slacking," she criticized. "I don't have eyes in the back of my head," he protested. "Plus I can't feel any negative emotions from them." He supposed they were just the plant monster's food. There was no ill intent, they were just hungry. He knew that feeling. Milka looked out over the rest of them. There honestly wasn't many left they could see through the bunch in front of them, and the few that were still surrounding Kurumu, Yukari and Tsukune, the succubus and witch having done most of the work, preventing them from being meals. He looked over to where the witch was. Whatever she was doing, it was going along a lot faster than what he previously thought. What looked like the torso had already formed, the arms were almost done, and its size was massive already, just about as big as one of the buildings in the city. Milka stepped back to him. "Throw me," she demanded. A plant monster launched at them, but she grabbed it and slammed it on the ground hard enough to put a dent in the earth. She stood back up straight and repeated herself. "Throw me, Uzumaki." "Fine, fine." Shoving his kunai in his pocket, he grabbed her wrist and upper arm, pulling her behind him. "Ready." Getting a nod, he leaned forward and flung his arms, hurling Milka through the air like a bullet, straight at the giant, forming monster. The wind whipped at her face, her hair flying around madly behind her. She twisted her body, bringing her leg around, so that she could smash her bare foot into the forming neck, and finish whatever the stupid witch was creating, before it was even relevant. That was her plan, anyway. But it was thwarted when something hard and heavy slammed into her side, making her grunt, and sending her rocketing away until she crashed into the ground, her body digging up a trench with the force behind it as she slid. She'd scared to herself, and got back up. There was a shallow cut on her leg, some of her own blood was dripping down her face from where it had been cut open, but it didn't faze her. She'd taken harder hits, when she was half her age. Mocha narrowed her eyes when she saw the giant plant monster orgy finish. It was easily larger than the buildings in the city. It remained still for a few seconds, before its body jerked forward, and a hand slammed into the earth, almost crushing Tsukune, Kurumu, and Yukari in the process, while Naruto had managed to get away pretty easily on his own. She hadn't doubted he would, though. He was faster than what she had previously thought possible. It opened its giant mouth, saliva dripping down off of its equally large set of fangs. Looking like she was part of the thing itself, the old witch cackled, bellowing down to all of them. Impressive, don't you think? Mocha didn't really think so, but she didn't voice her opinion, opting to listen instead. You don't look so good anymore, not against my centuries worth of experience and power. During her speech, the monster had righted itself, and Mocha got a good eyeful of its entirety for the first time. It had 4 green arms, all firmly planted on the ground and equally lathered in vines. Multiple heads were all around it, including the one with the open mouth that held the witch, and one much bigger one above her that was roaring to the mountains. Then Mocha saw her, Ruby. She'd apparently broken free from her restraints, black wings out for the world to see and admire, one firmly in hand. She was flying in front of the giant monster, screaming out, "Yukata-sama, don't. For heaven's sake, stop this." So Yukata was the name of the old bitch. Good. Now she knew what to carve into her corpse, so that everyone knew who she was. Wanting to get back in it, Mocha blasted back over towards Naruto and the others. She wasn't as fast as him, nowhere near it, but she wasn't slow either. "Get back," Mocha said, loud and clear, enough so that Ruby would hear her. Naruto stepped up beside her. She could feel something swirling around him, but couldn't tell what it was for the life of her. "You 3 as well, Tsukune, Kurumu-chan, Yukari-chan. But you said this was ours to deal with," Yukari protested. "So we're all helping, whether you like it or not." "No, you're not." Naruto's response was blunt and to the point, leaving no room for arguments. "Boo. I know what I said." Naruto didn't even look in their direction. But that was before this ugly fucker. And before Ruby-san got herself free. He glared straight at Yukata. "We've done our part, now Mocha and I are going to kick this thing's ass without you. Unless you just want to jump in and die, cause that's probably what'd happen. This isn't the time for talking." Yukata bellowed down to them. One of the hands came plummeting down right for Kurumu, Yukari, and Tsukune. Naruto had already gone. Figuring he'd gone to defend them, she took the offense and leaped onto the arm, sprinting up it as fast as she could without losing her footing. She heard a thunderous clap, followed by the earth shaking from the sudden stop in force. She didn't glance back. Even if she did, she doubted she'd see anything. There'd be a big green hand covered in vines in the way. She reached the shoulder and turned. She heard a loud crash, like something had just slammed into the ground, but ignored it in favor of making her way down the slanted neck towards the mouth where Yukata was. Just as she reached it, the jaw snapped shut. Not to be put off so easily, she quickly brought her leg up and kicked it tooth in, breaking it off with only a bit of effort, and sending it to the other side of the mouth. The monster roared out, and Mocha didn't have enough time to react before vines shouted the hole she created and wrapped her up like Ruby had been. But, unlike Ruby, the vines just kept coming and coming, even when her entire body had been covered. She glared at the other teeth. It was surprisingly hard to move, even with her strength. The witch hadn't taken any chances and tied her up good. Mocha paused in her struggling when she felt something bite into her neck. Looking down as much as she could in her position, she saw the end of a vine had latched itself onto her neck, and she could feel it draining her blood. Mocha renewed her efforts. She didn't have much room to move, but she wasn't going to do nothing. She wasn't going to be some pathetic damsel that needed saving. She'd get out herself. Eventually, the vines would give under her strength and they'd break, before the thing on her neck sucked her dry. She just had to wait a bit. Naruto held the giant hand back, keeping it from crushing him and his friends. Man, was he grateful for knowing how to harness natural chakra and use senjutsu. He definitely wouldn't have normally had the physical strength to hold something so heavy and strung back. But even then, he knew his sage mode wouldn't last long. He hadn't had all that much time to grab natural chakra after all. But it was enough to save his friends and more. He glanced at them, ignoring their amazed expressions. "Go," he ordered without strain. "Get Ruby-san and leave. Mocha-chan and I will handle the hag." "We're staying to Yukari," he interrupted seriously. "You're not staying to help. You'd only get in the way." He made eye contact with each of them. "I'm not kidding. Hurry up and leave. You think I can hold this thing forever?" As if to prove his point, he felt more pressure from the giant hand. He grunted, sliding back but keeping his balance. "Fine," Kurumu said. She looked disappointed, but understanding. "Come on, we've got to go. Naruto-kun and Mocha can handle themselves." Yukari deflated but didn't protest further. Tsukune was clutching the lone kunai he still had left over. A roar sounded above them. Naruto could feel the frustration radiating from him, but it was only aimed at himself, probably for not being able to do anything. "Don't worry, I'll teach you how to properly fight soon, Tsukune." The 3 of them got out from under the massive hand, while Naruto teleported himself out, hearing it crash loudly against the ground. He looked up and felt his face set itself into a deadpan. Really? She'd been caught. And so quickly, too. He lobbed a tri-pronged kunai up there. It's degrading. He mimicked her earlier words with a roll of his eyes, sarcasm rolling off his tongue. He sighed. Oh well. Better go get her out of there, he supposed. The other monster's hand formed into a fist. Came soaring down towards him and his lips quirked, not moving from his spot. Just before it crushed him, he felt the kunai land. As soon as it landed, just under the shoulder, Naruto was there. The fist was already throwing up smoke and bits of earth, but he gave it no mind, running down towards Mocha instead. On his way, he was forced to maneuver out of the way as vines were shot at him, trying to impale him. With his senjutsu, it was a piece of cake, but was still annoying. He could also feel the giant construct moving forwards, its giant steps making the earth below them shake. Just before he reached Mocha, he saw her hand pierce the vines surrounding her. From there she wrenched her entire arm upwards, slicing all the vines off of her. She yanked at one last one which was stuck to her neck, and threw it all the way down below with a scowl. Mocha glanced at him. Took your time. Oh, does Mocha-chan need big bad Naruto to come and save her from the mean plants? He looked in her eyes, poked her in the shoulder, and idly grabbed a vine that had launched at them. He ripped it out and hurled it away, never looking away from her. She pursed her lips. I didn't need saving, Uzumaki. He was about to reply, but Mocha turned from him, and smashed her foot against another one of the teeth, making it land right next to the other one. The giant monster roared out as it had before. Poor thing, that probably hurt so much. The monster convulsed, heaving forward and smashing a fist into the ground. I think you made it lose its mind, Mocha-chan. Good. Naruto sighed as they made their way into the mouth, the tooth door. You're such a mood killer. He pulled a face at the back of her head, just for the fuck of it. Yukata was in the middle of the mouth, covered in both pink and green, veins bulging out of her body all around. Okay. Jigs up lady, stop this spell Thinchi. Her disgustingly bulging eyes stared straight through him. When she spoke, her voice was lathered in anger and hatred. No. He wondered why she hadn't done anything to them. Did she not have much power up in this little control room? Fine. The kunai burst into his hand. I'll just start cutting you away from all this crap. Mocha piped in with her own suggestion, a much simpler one, and more tempting to do. Why not just kill her? Naruto paused and thought about it for a few moments. Nah. He shook his head. I don't think Ruby-san would like that. Or not yet, at least. Just as he'd leaned down to start his slicing, Yukata spoke. Don't you dare, boy. Then stop all of this. Naruto gestured around them. Another thundering crash shook the earth once again. No? She repeated and Naruto shrugged, leaning down once again, but paused at the sound of her voice. I couldn't. Even if I wanted to. He stared at her, wanting her to explain. The spell binds the user's life to the construct. So it's like that. Naruto stood back up fully. Fine. The kunai punctured her chest, straight through her heart. Once again, Ruby found herself waking up and seeing Naruto's face first. She was sitting on a park bench, her head resting on Kurumu's shoulder, Sukune seated on her other side. She remembered flying at her master, and she also remembered Kurumu grabbing her from behind, and keeping her away. She thrashed and fought her off, but Kurumu didn't let go. It only got worse for Ruby, when they got back to the ground and Yukari started to help keep her still. Eventually, she must have passed out. Mocha was off to the side, her hair still silver, eyes still red. Her expression was stoic and uninterested, and her arms were crossed over her chest. Yukari was sitting on top of the park bench, toying with her wand. Ruby took her head from Kurumu's shoulder, and looked directly at Naruto. She already knew the answer to her upcoming question, but wanted to hear it. What happened to Yukata-sama? He didn't even blink. I killed her. Blunt and straight to the point, how she preferred it. Sorry, Ruby-san, but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't let her keep rampaging around. Ruby looked at her hands in her lap. There was an empty feeling in her chest, like she'd lost a part of herself and couldn't breathe. She thought she'd cry, but she wasn't. Wasn't that what she was supposed to do? Cry over the loss of someone who'd raised her. She tried to force the tears out, maybe it'd take away the empty feeling, but nothing came. She went to stand up, but a sudden dizziness came over her. She wobbled on her spot, feeling someone grab her shoulders and keep her steady. She lifted her head up and looked into those blue eyes again. Nar. Get some sleep, Ruby-chan. He said. She swore his eyes flashed red for a moment. Sleep it off tonight and deal with it in the morning. Despite her wishes, she felt her body slackening, her eyes closing. She didn't have the energy to remain standing and fell forward, feeling his arms wrap around her and heft her up. She was on the brink of passing out completely. She doubted she'd be able to open her eyes if she tried, but she could tell she was awake still. She heard Sukune speak. His voice was low and kind of sketchy to hear. Well, what now, Naruto? We can't go back to the hotel. We can and we will. They wouldn't expect us to go back there. She felt her body being moved around, her arms going around Naruto's neck, his arms on the underside of her stocking-clad thighs to keep her steady. I'll go book a new room with someone else and pay with cash. Then I'll get everyone else in. He grunted softly and Ruby felt herself being shifted into what was probably a better position. I'll grab our stuff later. Their voices started to sound like they were getting further and further away, until she couldn't hear them anymore. That's when her mind decided to go into sleep mode. Naruto threw his backpack into the lounge room with a sigh. His friends looked around warily, like they were scared someone was going to jump out of the walls and start shooting at them. He didn't pay them much attention. With Ruby on his back again, he walked towards one of the bedrooms, opened the door and laid her down on the futon. She squirmed around a bit but didn't wake. Naruto walked over to the closet and grabbed one of the covers out from it, throwing it over Ruby's body, so she'd stay warm while she slept. Taking one last look at her sleeping face, Naruto slipped out of the room. As soon as he felt himself get spun around before being pinned to the wall, the feeling of Milka's fangs piercing his neck. He held her hips to keep her steady as she leaned into him and took her feed. She detached and entangled herself from him, tongue gliding over her teeth, eyes glinting, like she already wanted more. He gave a half smile. You're gonna get fat if you drink too much of my blood. Shall we test that? No? He deadpanned, getting a huff. Besides, I'm going to get all our stuff. I doubt anyone wants to walk around the city half naked and covered in blood. Milka looked down at herself. From head to toe, green and red blood covered her skin and shirt, some of it her own. She looked back up at him. I don't see the problem. You wouldn't? He retorted with a roll of his eyes. But I'm still going. Fine. She held her hand out expectantly, waiting for something. The rosary, Uzumaki. He shook his head. Could you stay a little longer? He asked. The others are probably going to fall asleep soon, and no one's going to be here to make sure no one finds us. Milka frowned. I'm not your lapdog. I know. He replied. You're a friend. That's why I asked you. She eventually agreed to, although reluctantly, and only because she'd be getting more of his blood. He didn't get her obsession with it. Sure, she drank blood, and that was her preferred source of food, or whatever it was to her, but what was so good about his specifically? He shook his head as his body was consumed in smoke. His hair turned black and flattened on his head, the blue in his eyes dulled slightly, stubble appeared on his chin and around his mouth, while his body got a bit slimmer and taller. His clothes changed into a suit. Pants, jacket, undershirt, shoes, the whole shebang. Now looking like he had when he paid for the room, Naruto left, heading for the stairs and started his way down. They were much higher in the building than they had been before, so Naruto had been able to see and walk past the sectioned off area around his room. The police officer's corpse had already been moved, but his blood was still there, and the small section was sectioned off as well. There had been a few officers at his door when he'd gone up, and he wondered if they were still there. Turned out they were. Walking past the blood-stained wall, Naruto made his way over to them. Hey. Naruto greeted them, staying outside the boundaries that had been set up. They turned away from the door, pausing their attempts to find a way inside. I came up this way before to get to my room, he said casually. And I was just wondering what happened. The clearly older officer gestured the younger one to keep working on the door. His green eyes bored into Naruto's own. I can't share any specifics, obviously, he said. But there's a killer on the loose. Several officers tried to raid his and his accomplice's room earlier, but they managed to get away. Oh? He tried to sound just a bit worried. Well, do you know who he is? The man shook his head. No, but we will soon. These people never get far. Naruto nodded along with him, before gesturing to the door. You look like you're having some trouble. Want me to have a look at it? I'm quite the locksmith. He shook his head again. No one's allowed near it. Besides, I don't think it's got anything to do with the lock we tried to bash it open when we first got here. It should have broken under the force. Naruto sent chakra into his eyes briefly. You'd be surprised, he said. Some of the more expensive locks can be extremely powerful. You wouldn't have an easy time breaking one of them. A casual smile lit up his face. Just let me have a look, officer. I won't take long, and if I can't get it open then nothing changes. The man glanced at the door before sighing. Fine, come on. He lifted up the tape that had "Do Not Cross" written on it, and Naruto ducked under. But be quick about it. The other officer had already moved out of the way. Naruto bent down and looked at the lock, placing his palm just above it, disabling the seal he placed earlier. And with just a light push, the door slowly swung open, and Naruto stood up straight. Well, there you go. He made his way inside. Hearing something being slid out of a holster, along with two similar sounding clicks, Naruto turned around to see the two officers, both pointing their guns at him, something slim attached to the end of the weapons. The younger man had a small smirk on his face, while the older one had a blank and straight face. Don't move, it'll be easier that way, he said. Naruto blinked. Is there a problem? The younger officer's finger twitched on the trigger and Naruto narrowed his eyes. Yes. A pop, a thunk, and glass being broken, were the sounds that came. Naruto was standing by the back wall near the bedrooms, holding the hilt of the kunai that was embedded in the wall. The young officer aimed his gun at him again. You're still alive. He shot again, and Naruto appeared to his left, catching the kunai he'd thrown in midair. Not letting the young officer take another shot, Naruto ended it with a swift and clean slice to his neck, spilling blood over the sleeve of his fake suit as well as the floor. Knowing there was another one, Naruto grabbed the body and yanked it around in front of him, just in time for it to catch a few quiet rounds in the chest. Naruto leaned over the dead man's shoulder and lobbed his kunai, listening to the schlick as it was lodged inside of him. It was soon followed by a soft thud, then a louder thud. Dropping the corpse he was holding onto the floor, letting the blood pool around it, Naruto started to grab their things. Grab stuff. Seal. Then. He glanced at the two dead bodies. Then clean up. Milka was sitting on the couch, left leg crossed over her other, finger tapping away at the cushioned armrest in impatience. She was the only one still awake. Yukari had gone to her room to get some sleep. Kurumu and Sukune had tried to stay awake, but had failed. The human was on the laid-back chair on the other side of the lounge room, head lolled back, mouth open, some drool escaping it. Kurumu was on the couch with her, albeit on the other side. She was taking up 2 spaces, her head resting on the armrest, her legs were curled up on the cushion in the middle, and she was snoring lightly. And of course Ruby was still asleep in the room Naruto had placed her in. She was about to get up, storm out of the room and go bring Naruto back herself, but then the door opened and he walked in. Well, he was still using that disguise, but she knew it was him. Smoke popped around him, his hair turned blonde, his blue eyes got brighter, and he shrunk a couple of inches. He smelled of blood, fresh blood. She'd been able to feel his power, when he was down there, fluctuating somewhat, and she wondered what had been going on. What happened? He made his way into the lounge room, doing a few weird hand signs, before placing his palm on the floor. Just a couple of guys. He replied as seal spread from his hand, electing a cloud of smoke and another similar popping sound. When it cleared, Milka gazed at all their things. He flitted through a couple of things before grabbing her bag and throwing it to her. She caught it before standing up and setting it on the floor. She sauntered over to him. You owe me something. Naruto rolled his eyes, but exposed his neck all the same. Dig in, Vrekalakis. She made sure to bite harder than she normally would at being called that. She was a vampire, not part of a race, that couldn't handle it and died out. Once she had another share of the delicious liquid, she stepped back, licking her lips for anything she might have missed, and held her hand out. Digging into his pocket, he brought out a rosary, placing it in her hand. Grasping it, she went and took her bag, making her way towards one of the rooms. Goodbye, Uzumaki. See you next time. She slid the door open, closing it once she was in one of the bedrooms. Letting the bag fall to the ground next to the futon, she slid the blood-coated shirt over her head, ignoring the smell, and threw it into the corner of the room. Looking down at herself, she appreciated what her other self had put on. She'd apparently decided on black, rather than her usual white. Not bad. She grabbed some covers out from the closet, throwing them over the futon, before getting under them with a sigh. She held the rosary in the air in front of her. She still didn't know the exact reason why she had it, but she knew that she had to wear it. With that thought in mind, she shifted the covers and clipped it back on, her vision disappearing and her consciousness going to sleep. Naruto woke up at the screaming. Pulling the covers off of him, he ran to the window that was in his room, uncaring to not having anything on but his boxers. The scream had came from outside, that was for sure. Throwing the curtains aside and opening the window, his eyes widened at what he saw. In the distance, there was buildings on fire, smoke rising into the air. The streets were packed with screaming and running civilians. Helicopters covered the night sky. What the fuck? The helicopter just outside of the hotel flew low, moving slowly, the front of it dipping down, aimed at the fleeing civilians. He heard a whirling sound, then what sounded like a million gunshots hit his ears. The roads were torn up, screams were silenced, people hit the hard ground, blood filled the streets. When it was done, the helicopter flew higher into the sky before moving away. Naruto furrowed his brows and narrowed his eyes when he saw a group of 4 men, wearing the same black getup that the guys Hitsukune said might be SWAT were wearing. They'd exited a building, each of them holding a hostage roughly, one of them being a boy no older than 11, the other 3 being much older, probably a family. Naruto could hear their wailing as the men in black pushed them to the ground, forcing them on their knees. Putting their guns to the back of their heads, they all fired once around the same time. The family members hunched forward, blood spilling from their heads, before they were either pushed over or collapsed onto their sides. A sudden explosion dragged his attention to a building that had been consumed in an inferno. He could see human-sized fireballs jumping out of where the windows had once been. People were literally jumping out of the building while being burnt alive. Naruto. Kurama's voice reached him. Are you going to do something, or can I go back to sleep? No, you're not going back to sleep. Naruto quickly made his way to his bag, which he placed in the corner of his bedroom. Unzipping it, he pulled some clothes out, throwing them on as fast as he could. As soon as he gotten his shoes back on, his door slammed open, and Milka stood there, wearing only a black bra and panties, but she didn't seem to care. He cocked an eyebrow. Hey, what are you doing up? She sounded panicked. Her chest heaved with every one of her words. Have you not seen what's happening? No, I've seen it. He zipped up his backpack and slung it on. It's why I'm ready. I'm getting all of you out of the city first. He was about to say more, but Mocha interrupted him. No, she said firmly, standing her ground. I can help. Kurumu-chan can help. Yukari-chan and Ruby-san can as well. Even Sukune can help. She didn't break eye contact with him. We're going to be helping, whether you like it or not. Kurumu poked her head around the corner. Yup, she said smirking, as if to confirm Mocha's words. Naruto stared into Mocha's eyes longer, judging her. She didn't look away. Sorry to burst your bubble, he said. But Ruby-chan won't wake up for a long time. She's going to have to sit this one out. Mocha's face brightened at the implication. She bounded forward, leaping at him, and wrapping her limbs around him. He grabbed onto her, and held her there. Over her shoulder, Naruto could see Kurumu wiggle her eyebrows at him. He introduced her to his middle finger. She stuck her tongue at him before leaving. Thank you, Naruto-kun. Yeah. He pulled his head back and tilted it up to look at her. You're going to need to get dressed first though. Her eyes widened, like she was suddenly aware of what she was wearing. Her face flushed, she let go of him, and zipped out of his room into her own, squeaking out as she went. Sorry. Naruto shook his head and muttered to himself. No need to say sorry, it was a good view. Compassing himself, he went to Ruby's room. She needed to get taken out of the city. Throwing the covers off of her and picking her up bridal style, he locked onto the lone kunai he deliberately left where they'd fought Yukata. Suddenly, he was there. The landscape had been torn asunder. The ground was littered with large craters, trees had been uprooted, and were a long way away from where they had been. He didn't linger on the place much and instead set Ruby down, leaning her body against one of the toppled trees. He quickly flicked through some hand seals, and when he placed his hand on her head she disappeared from even his view. No one would find her. Or he was pretty sure no one would. Things always did tend to turn against him. He appeared back in the room's lounge room, feeling something, or someone, crash into him. Blinking, he saw Tsukune stumbling backwards, and rubbing his nose. You alright? Do you have to just show up in front of me like that all the time? This is the first time you've hit me. Naruto protested. But yeah, I do, it's kinda fun. Tsukune scowled. He looked like he was going to open his mouth again, but Naruto cut him off, making him inadvertently straighten his posture. Tsukune, you have to get them out of the city, he said. I don't care who, just get as many as you can and get out. Then come back and get some more. Naruto wasn't having any arguments. Can you do that? Yeah. I can do that. Tsukune sounded a bit disappointed that he wasn't going to be helping in fighting, but he understood that he wouldn't be any help anyway. Good. Go get Yukari-chan and get her to help you. Nodding, Tsukune left the room to get Yukari and start his job. Kurumu, he called out. The succubus popped out of her room, pulling the rest of her skirt up properly. Think you can take out those helicopters? She smirked smugly. Piece of cake. He reached Mocha's room, seeing Kurumu fly out of the window from the corner of his eyes. Just as he was about to open the sliding door, a large pulse of Yuki caught his full attention. It was strong, stronger than any he'd felt before, even outclassing Mocha's. He didn't know why, but he felt like it was calling out to him, goading him to rush towards it and attack whoever it belonged to. Fine, he thought. If they were the ones causing this, and they wanted a fight, then they sure as hell were going to get one. Mocha slid her door open. She wore a short skirt, black shoes, socks that reached to just under her knees, and a white blouse with buttons and long sleeves. Ready? He asked. She took in a breath and nodded resolutely. Ready. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification, and also check out the other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.